final speaker is Palma Black, CEO and founder of Soul Purpose 360. What this lady does, I could not put into one sentence or on the back of an envelope, or I just could not sum it up for you. So I think I will let her speak for herself. Palma?
Yeah, thank you guys. Your contributions were amazing. When I was asked to speak on this topic, honestly, my mind just went, it's such a huge topic. And I was trying to I was struggling for days to try and hone in on what I'm going to talk about. And so I thought, you know what, if I did a presentation, at least then I'll have some structure. And I won't be rambling off because, you know, I've got so many examples and stories and anecdotes that I could share to really kind of illustrate the points. And I thought, well, let me just try and stay in some structure. So, as you said, I'm the founder and CEO of a Black Women's Empowerment organisation that actually, it became a movement by, it wasn't deliberate. I'd set out to coach and mentor just a handful of women at a time. And in no time at all, women were calling me up saying, can I join your organisation? I'm like, sorry, you've got the wrong person. And they're like, no, the one that Deandra's in. And I'm like, okay, fine. And then they began to come in their droves. And I'm thinking, well, there's something behind this. And so now we have I would describe it as a national organisation with a global membership. And it's just women who want to be empowered. And age group ranges from about 18 to 80 plus. And there's kind of no end to what it is that they want to do. My background, however, is very diverse. My career path is not linear. I'm a biologist by academia. I left university and fell headlong into anti-racist politics, national and local. I've worked in community development, in the voluntary sector, in the social enterprise sector, from when social enterprise was just becoming a thing. I've worked in social housing for very, very many years, not in housing, but in community development through housing. And I spent many of those years working with frontline teams and boards. I've been a board member of housing associations as well. And the aim of those, or for me being in those, were to help to create safer communities, to make sure that services were delivered fairer and that systems were more accountable. I've also worked in communities to empower individuals and groups to be more deliberate in solving their own problems rather than looking for others to solve them for them. I've been a funder. The largest organisation I worked with was the Football Foundation. I had a passion for football as a child, and when I was asked to go on the board of the Football Foundation, I jumped at it. So what I really want to talk about is how I have navigated things that I've seen and kind of end up with some suggestions, and then when we go into question and answer, I think it would be a kind of different thing there. So what do we mean by community-led? We hear the word community-led all the time. We read about it on funding reports. You know, they tell us that, you know, we want your funding idea to come from the community. We read about it in strategy documents. We see it on organisational posters, and as I said, the Football Foundation had all of this stuff about community-led. But labels don't share power, people do. And when I was trying to get the Football Foundation to understand that what they needed to change in order to change the funding, they were very, very resistant to what I was saying. And when I say community-led, I mean led by decision or decision-led. Those that are most affected by what it is that we're talking about, and not consultation-heavy or not co-creation light either. And for me, in practice, community-led looks like agenda setting. It looks like residents or beneficiaries or clients defining the problem, not just reacting to it. And oftentimes, funders will tell us what the problems are and what they're looking for as solutions. And if those solutions don't fit, we're not going to fit. Resource control, budgets, timelines and success measures are negotiated with the community and can actually be vetoed by them as well. And then governance, members hold seats with voting rights on steering groups and boards with data access and the authority to stop or pivot projects. And one of these really great examples, I would say, was Big Local, and the way that Local Trust developed the Big Local programme, that you had residents who were in charge of the £1 million, about how that was going to be spent. That to me was how funding, community-led funding should be. It should be down to the people that live there to define their problems and for them to lead the solutions. And accountability, so we need feedback loops so that the residents, beneficiaries or clients, and I'll use these terms interchangeably, they are the ones that come first, and not to the funders or to any of those press releases either. I believe that when these things are absent, we're looking at funder-led work with participatory theatre on the outside. And sometimes these are well-intentioned, but the structure remains unchanged. And we've seen what happens when residents, beneficiaries, or whatever, are ignored. Grenfell. You know, when you don't listen to the people who are telling you what the problem is and what the solution is, the outcome is never going to be good. So where does the power really sit? So let's be honest, participation is political because resources are political. In social housing, I've seen funding cycles that dictate priorities, they compress timelines, they narrow definitions of impact, we have targets and KPIs, you know, they can be useful, but they're set so far from lived reality, they actually distort what it is that we're trying to do. And so for me, three common dynamics repeatedly show up. Metrics over meaning. When success is measured only by outputs, so events delivered, surveys completed, rather than the outcomes that the residents or the beneficiaries care about, the impact. So residents in social housing, what they want is safe estates, they want responsive repairs, they want culturally competent services, and what we actually find is that we get busy but not better at what it is that we're doing. Short-termism. Projects that start and stop with funding seasons invite fatigue and distrust. Communities are asked to mobilise repeatedly without any lasting authority or infrastructure. I've seen organisations, and social housing is one of them, repeatedly run training programmes for black women over and over and over again, and I've seen the same black woman go from one training programme to the next, to the next, to the next, and not improving. And I will tell a story about this later on. But what I've seen very clearly is that black women are funding fodder. You know, for very, very many years, white organisations will get the funding to deliver training for black women. You know, black women seen as, you know, single mums, you know, unemployed. Black women's organisations would never get the funding to deliver for black women. And that was one of the reasons when I set up Soul Purpose 360 and it was becoming something, and we'll talk a bit more about that, that I was absolutely adamant that we wouldn't be reliant on funding, and that's why I chose a CIC model rather than a charity model. Gatekeeping. Professional language and processes become barriers. Residents are framed as beneficiaries rather than experts in their own conditions, which keeps them outside of the decision rooms even when they're invited in. Lived experience matters. It's got to be seen as the most important thing when it comes to understanding what those solutions are. In other words, funder-led participation often asks for voice without offering power, and when communities refuse that trade, they're sometimes labelled as hard to reach. And what they really mean is that it's hard to accept. So lessons from social housing, what works? Across my social housing experience, there's been a consistent, irrespective of which landlords I've worked for. So we start with safety and equity, not surface engagement. If residents don't feel physically safe or psychologically safe, participation will only be performative. And you'll find the same individuals turning up time and time again and nothing really changing. So over the years, I would summarise my learning in 3 ways. So first of all, resolve the urgent repairs and social behaviour concerns. Actually listen to the people, listen to the residents, hear what they have to say, listen to communities, hear what they have to say, and act on those things first and foremost. Allow residents to lead, allow communities to lead. So establish community forums with clear escalation routes. So if residents have a voice, if communities feel that they have a voice and that's being listened to, you're more likely to get engagement, you're more likely to get change coming at the end of it. And thirdly, co-design for longer change. So it's not just what is the immediate thing that needs to change, it's about what is the long-term change. And if we're talking about really creating social change, we have to look beyond the first round of funding. You know, it can't end. It has to be, what is the change that needs to happen? How will you know what that change looks like and feels like? So what needs to happen is that people's time needs to be funded, whether that's residents or whether that is communities. They need to be paid to participate and not just seen as we're extracting data from them. And so the funding model really needs to change. So we budget for consultant day rates. Why shouldn't we budget for resident engagement rates as well? In regeneration, consultation, paying community conveners, childcare, accessibility and translation costs can turn attendance into leadership and plans can change. Reduction in antisocial behaviour, safer estates, communities are more cohesive, community facilities become protected, because when residents have leverage, it's much more powerful than when we just give them a microphone. Share the whole picture, educate and upskill residents. When residents see the full constraints, and for me it's really important that we don't just see residents and communities as illiterates, as people that don't understand what we're talking about, because very often we're in the room. You know, we understand, we can speak, we educated people in communities, and therefore we do need to resource that better, we do need to look at upskilling them. One of the best projects I ever worked on was a housing regeneration program where we upskilled the residents so that they understood things about that master planning. They understood, you know, about the constraints when it came to architecture. And I remember out of that, one woman said to me, I'd really love to become an architect. And I introduced her to an architect's firm, and 20 years later, I saw her and she's an architect, doing exceptionally well. So just to move on really quickly, as the founder member of Sole Purpose 360, I created that organisation, taking into consideration my 30 plus years of experience, the good, the bad and the ugly. And we are really member-led. Everything that we do in our organisation is with and by consent of our members. We listen very carefully and intently to what our members need. Even though I am a black woman, I can't speak on behalf of every black woman. We're not all the same, we're so very, very different. So our local hubs are run by our members choose empowerment workshops that happen. And in the early days, and they'd say to me, can I have a workshop on? And I'd be like, really? Really? Okay, fine, I'll find someone to do that. And those workshops were the most powerful workshops because the women had asked for them. Not that I conceived them, that they wanted them. Capacity and care, we care about leadership development, trauma-informed facilitation, well-being support. These aren't add-ons for us, these are prerequisites because we understand where our members are coming from. Dual accountability, our volunteer members are our project leads. They're empowered to have a voice and shape every project. And oftentimes a member will come to me and say, I think you should do so-and-so. And I say, no, I think you should do it. And I'll support you to do it. And I've seen women blossom and grow in a way that even they didn't think that they could do that. I'm just going to move on really, really quickly now. So I realise I am taking up a lot of time, aren't I? Okay.
Next one.
We're on. Yeah, let's go to the next one.
Yeah.
So really some practical ideas for funders really. From consultation to consent. Don't just collect views. Secure community consent for project aims and the method of delivery. From KPIs to co-owned scorecards, build measurements with residents, beneficiaries, or clients, however you want to define them, and make it binding across contracts. From grants to shared governance, create resident seats with votes and vetoes on steering groups, and tie payments to dual approvals. And then short-term projects to local infrastructure. Fund the organising capacity, community conveners, training spaces and so on to make sure that all the grants is used in a way that is empowering. From beneficiaries to co-investors. Recognise the community time and the expertise and the pay contributions. Put that in the budget, not just the acknowledgements. And none of this removes the funder's responsibility. For me, it clarifies it. Funders become partners in power sharing, not managers of participation. And in closing, I think the question for me isn't whether participation is community-led or funder-led. The question is, where does the power sit when decisions are made? And whether communities have the authority to stop, steer and succeed on their own terms. My challenge is, if what we call community-led cannot survive without funder control, then it's not really community-led, it's community-dependent. Let's build models that have soul at the heart, community authority and infrastructure, so participation is not performative, but a practice. So my invitation is this: work with organisations like Sole Purpose 360 and Lenina's organisation, resident leaders and grassroots groups to redesign the terms, the budgets, the governance, the metrics, so communities can lead for real. And when we do this, we don't just improve projects, we restore trust, we grow local capacity, and make change that lasts any funding cycle. And that's my contribution.